Hello, my name is Stuart Pepper, S-T-U-A-R-T-P-E-P-P-E-R. My email address is stu@stuartpepper.com, STU@S-T-U-A-R-T-P-E-P-P-E-R.com. I also have a website address I want to give you at this time, which is thecoverup.net, THECOVERUP.net. If after this video you decide to want to do a further investigation of your own into what I'm about to tell you, go to that website. That includes the Thacker case, the trial documents, depositions, FBI reports, case photographs, exhibits, and things of that nature, which I will expound upon during this video. The other thing I want you to be aware of at the outset is a movie called The Cover-Up. Simply two words, The Cover-Up, which is available on Amazon Prime Video, which you can watch today if you'd like. So the website and the movie are connected, and the movie was made by myself in 2007 in Hollywood, California, under the brilliant directorship of Brian Jun, J-U-N, starring Eliza Dushku, Gabriel Mann, John Savage, Lee Garlington, and some other extraordinary actors. The movie was made to show you, the public, what the FBI did in 1986 in criminally covering up a murder committed by a police officer against Kevin Thacker, a young man in his custody. Now, let me introduce to you then the people involved in this tragedy. Kevin Thacker was 20 years old, single, college student from East Des Moines, Iowa, the son of Beverly and Thomas Thacker. Kevin had 5 siblings. He was the youngest child of the family. Kevin's family was a police family. Kevin's father, Tom's father, his grandfather, was a police officer for the city of Des Moines for 25 years. He was the jailer. Tom himself would function as an auxiliary police officer for the city of Des Moines, and so he had no qualms about the police. It wasn't after them. It was actually a police family. Anyway, on October 29th, Kevin drives to Marshalltown to meet with a friend, and we don't know what he did during the evening there, because after he was hit in the head and died, no one was able to talk to him about what he did that evening before he was picked up. But apparently he must have been drinking, because he was arrested and found to be drunk driving by one Kendall Eldred, K-E-N-D-A-L-L-E-L-D-R-E-D. He is the Marshalltown police officer who on October 29, 1983, hit Kevin Thacker in the head and basically murdered him at that time. Although Kevin didn't die until 6 days later. But I'll talk about that a little bit later. Now, pursuant to protocol, Eldred drove Thacker to the Marshalltown police station building. Marshalltown is a relatively small city in Iowa, with a relatively small police department. I would estimate perhaps 30 to 40 at that time police employees. Now, the building that the police was housed in was a 3-story brick building, formerly the phone company building, which left a 6-foot metal beam protruding off the top of the roof, which they used to hoist up heavy equipment. That's why the I-beams usually are hanging over some roofs. The way to get into the building after being arrested is through a metal door in the alley. Now, there's an alley between the back of the police station building and another building adjacent to it called the Marshalltown Coliseum building. It's about 13 feet across the alley from one building to the other. So the door that Eldred used to go into with Thacker to be videotaped for his field sobriety test and booked for drunk driving was in the alley. You get into the door from the alley. So Eldred punched the numbers to get open the door, so Kevin knew exactly how he got into the building. On the other side of the door, as you'll see in the photograph, is a crash bar. And that is the way you get out of that door, out of the hallway, out of the building, is pushing the crash bar and going into the alley. So Eldred takes Kevin through that door, down the hallway, into the booking room. I can't tell you exactly what the distance is, but let's say 30 feet, and starts to videotape the field sobriety test of Kevin Thacker, which you can see excerpts of. Later that evening, after Kevin's blood is taken, it's determined he was at a 0.2 blood alcohol. Now, Mr. FBI agent looking at this, who covered up this murder, what does 0.2 mean to you when a person is at blood alcohol level? Yes, that's right, extremely intoxicated. Could hardly walk straight, had to hold on to the wall to keep his balance. So this is the condition Kevin Thacker was in at the time of his arrest, as verified in this video taken by Kendall Eldred, approximately 1 o'clock in the morning. The two of them are alone in the back of the police station building. As you can see from the video, Kevin, at the end of the video, has to leave the room because after Eldred told him his license would be suspended for a year if this is a second DUI, which it was, Kevin knew his license was in jeopardy. And as being 0.2 blood alcohol, being very confused in his thinking, I'm sure, Kevin decided to run and escape from Eldred to be able to get away. Don't ask me what his thinking was, no one knows, but that's exactly what he did. Because when he told Eldred he wanted to go to the bathroom, he was getting sick after being told his license could be suspended for a year, he then bolted on Eldred down the hall. And you can hear in the videotape, which you FBI people ignored, of course, you can hear two crash bar doors of the door opening. And that obviously was Kevin Thacker first going into the alley, followed by Eldred right behind him. And something happened in the alley. Only Eldred knows exactly what he did, but it's safe to surmise, by at least this probable cause, if not beyond a reasonable doubt, and I'll explain to you later why, Kendall Eldred struck Kevin Thacker in the left side of his skull, the temporal bone, break with such force that it cracked the bone down to the occipital lobe, to the occipital bone, which caused a contracrue injury. Now, a contracrue injury is an injury to the brain that's caused by being struck in the skull. When you're struck in the skull, your brain floats in a fluid. It then hits the other side of the skull, opposite to where the force was applied for a contracrue injury. It can only occur, a contracrue injury, is if you're hit in the head with an object. And that's exactly the cause of death of Kevin Thacker. And that's the only injury found in his body later on in the autopsy, is a hairline fracture to the side of his head. Well, something happened in the alley, like I said, and only Eldred knows exactly what he did, because he obviously applied homicidal force to the head of Kevin Thacker, which caused him to become mortally wounded. He didn't die that night. He was unconscious immediately with a fractured skull and a brain hemorrhage. He was rushed to the hospital, and 6 days later at Des Moines Methodist Hospital, which I'll explain later, his parents unfortunately had the horrifying job of, I can't even say job, the horrifying thing of pulling the plug on their son, leading to his death. Well, the version that Kendall Eldred gave, and the FBI agreed with 100% to this day. In other words, you FBI agents who hear this video, if you are interested, have got to accept all the lies and the cover-up perpetrated by the Marshalltown police that evening to clear Kendall Eldred of murder. So everything I'm about to tell you was believed wholeheartedly by the FBI and not criticized or questioned. This in spite of the following. In January of 1984, a few months after Kevin Thacker's demise, his parents come to my law office in Des Moines, Iowa. At the time, my office were known to be successful in prosecuting police officers for excessive force and brutality. We won every case but one, basically, but you know, that's also a questionable what happened in that one. I won't get into that. I don't want to sound arrogant, but we feel that every brutality case we took, we won. Okay, so Carmen Bev Thacker came to my office and began to tell me why they were there. Basically because they could not understand or comprehend the explanation given by the Marshalltown police as to what happened to their son. The cops are trying to tell them that their son did all these magnificent athletic feats while drunk, fell off of a roof 24 feet high, fell to the ground with no injury. And they thought this was impossible. And they weren't about just to accept and forget about what the police wrote and forget about their son's, what happened to their son. Well, after a short discussion, I asked Mr. Thacker if he had the autopsy report of his son, which he did. It's quite amazing. Most clients won't have something like that, but he happened to have one, which I read quickly. And after I finished reading it, I looked up to him and Bev and said, Mr. and Mrs. Thacker, I'll take your case. The police murdered your son, or killed your son, one or the other. Because in reading the autopsy report and reading the press release the Marshalltown police issued, which they happen to have a copy of also, which you can see here on the screen, they said that by 4 o'clock in the morning, they had it all figured out, that Kevin Thacker was found in the alley after falling from a roof on his back, and everything that would happen to him that night was his own fault and his own doing, and that Kendall Eldred, the officer who had him in custody, had nothing to do with the fatal wound to his skull or anything to do with him being in the alley. That then begins to cover up. So, Kendall Eldred says the following. Kevin ran on him on the way to the bathroom, but somehow Kendall Eldred said he lost sight of Kevin in the hallway, which is impossible because, as you can see in the video, Kendall was out just a few feet behind Kevin Thacker, and no cop is going to let a prisoner run on him and escape and not see where he went. So Kendall Eldred began his lies, which the FBI is believed, by the way. And let me backtrack another minute. After the Thacker family hired us, our duty as lawyers then were to institute a wrongful death lawsuit against Kendall Eldred and the city of Marshalltown and Marshalltown Police Department who employed him under respondeat superior, meaning the employer is liable for the torts of their employee. Plus also we sued him under 18 U.S.C. 1983. I'm not sure that's exactly the right one right now, but under the Civil Rights Act. We went to trial. We actually went to trial. The city denied liability, very cocky, very arrogant. We had nothing to do with this kid's death, although everything led to that conclusion. So we tried the case in October 1984 in front of an 8-person Marshall County jury. The same county the cops came from, the same city the cops came from. A mixture of men and women. After hours of deliberation, after a 4-day sensational trial covered every day by the Des Moines Register newspaper, Headline News, they came by a verdict agreeing with us, and all they had to decide was one thing: which way did Kevin Thacker die? From falling from the roof or being hit in the head by the cop? And since the evidence was so overwhelming, and without a doubt that the cop killed the kid, they could not possibly have ruled he fell from the roof, which completely annihilated and contradicted the cover-up and all the lies the Marshalltown police perpetrated to try to get out of this murder. The trial judge, Carl Peterson, who used to be the city attorney for Marshalltown and used to be the lawyer for the police department, the presiding judge heard all the evidence as well as the jury. He concluded that Kevin Thacker was never on the roof, so this whole cover-up, this whole fantasy story, this complete fabrication by Templeton and the rest of his cops was a complete lie. Kevin Thacker was never on the roof, and therefore Kevin Thacker was indeed in fact killed in the alley by a human being. That decision was appealed to the Iowa Supreme Court, which about a year and a half later, after a meticulous review of the record, agreed with us that Kevin Thacker was never on the roof, but was actually murdered in the alley by Kendall Eldred. A 17-page detailed opinion by the Iowa Supreme Court, which is worth reading, which is in the coverup.net website. So, after we get the verdict from the jury, we went to the FBI thinking that they were real Americans, that they were really real cops, and they would actually do justice and arrest criminals who commit murder, especially policemen, under the Civil Rights Act. How foolish we were, how naive we were. I will never, ever, and I urge anyone to ever trust the FBI again. For what they did in this case, and they still continue to do, is reprehensible, criminal, and totally un-American. They're not an American institution. To me, they're a criminal organization using their patriotic flag as cover for being such good guys. Okay, so we went to the FBI, and in 1984, Richard Turner and Robert Doff were the assistant AGs appointed by Ronald Reagan. This was now the new administration coming in, the Ronald Reagan administration. And after a phony year-and-a-half investigation, in spite of the jury, in spite of the trial judge, in spite of the Supreme Court of Iowa affirming the verdict and ruling that Thacker was killed in the alley by Eldred, the FBI issued a report completely clearing all cops involved. Not one perjury charge, not one obstruction of justice charge, not one charge of lying to the FBI during their investigation. And that completely whitewashed the entire case. No one was charged with murder or perjury or anything else to do with the crime. They went along lock, stock, and barrel 100% with all the lies and fabrication that the Marshalltown police concocted. This is your FBI. One example of their phony, completely corrupt investigation is the following. And I'll go more later on into more evidence in the case about Kendall Eldred. But Darrell Rock Templeton, who was a detective on duty that night for the Marshalltown police, kicked into high gear the most fantastic, ridiculous, absurd cover-up ever perpetrated, which was believed 100% by the FBI. Rock Templeton was able to fabricate a story so unbelievable that no rational person on this earth would ever believe or accept. Only the FBI did. When Kendall Eldred radioed to his colleagues that the prisoner was down in the alley, after going back in the alley a second time, and there was Kevin Thacker on his back, Eldred told his fellow officers, "Prisoner down, get an ambulance." This then had officers come to the alley. The first one there was a Koenig, K-E-O-N-I-G, who asked Eldred what happened to this young man, because Kevin Thacker was in the alley bleeding from the ear, on his back, and it looked like he was hit by a car, according to Koenig, asking Eldred. But no, Eldred instead points up to the roof, making the suggestion that this kid fell from the roof, and that's how he got to be there. Now, Koenig, being a police officer, part of a conspiracy of silence, did not, of course, double question Eldred about what happened. Why would Eldred, who said that he lost sight of his prisoner and did not know how he got to the alley, why would he all of a sudden make up the story that he fell from the roof or came from the roof? Why wouldn't he have examined the body if that was even possible? Because in fact, there was no injury to the body. And had he checked the body as a normal cop would have, he would have realized there's no way he fell from the roof, but he was assaulted in the alley, and a hunt should have been put on for the perpetrator. But no, Rock Templeton comes on the scene, knew this kid was murdered, but did not want to have any connection with Kendall Eldred, and kicked into high gear, as I said, a most fantastic cover-up. According to Templeton and Eldred, that the FBI completely agreed with, contrary to the jury, the trial judge, Supreme Court of Iowa, the following: that Kendall Eldred lost sight of Kevin Thacker as Kevin Thacker bolted out the door. Kendall Eldred then looked in the alley, not knowing where Kevin was first, looked in the alley, didn't see the kid, came back inside, went back to the booking room where the video camera was, turned it off, got his walkie-talkie, then made the announcement to his fellow officers in the building, "Prisoner is loose in the building." Not in the alley, but loose in the building. Obviously, Eldred did not want his fellow officers coming into the alley, because he had to go back in the alley, Eldred, to place the body under the beam to support his story about falling off the roof. So he had all these officers now searching the building, which Eldred knew, of course, he wasn't in. And Eldred himself very doubtfully ever made a search of the building. So after a couple of minutes of placing Kevin Thacker's body in the alley under the beam on his back with his arms and legs out, which no one would end up looking like if they were fell off a roof for 24 feet. The skull would have been cracked open like a coconut. The brains would have been splattered all over the pavement with blood coming everywhere. Broken spine, neck broken, organs broken. All of that would have happened to him. Eldred then, when he went back into the alley a second time, placed the body, then took his walkie-talkie and said, "Prisoner down in the alley." Now he's telling these guys who are looking in the building, "I'll come out to the alley now. I have him. He's down. Get an ambulance." That's when Koenig comes up and says, "What happened?" And Eldred points up and says he fell from the roof. This starts the story about covering up falling from the roof. That's when Templeton kicks in. So Templeton then takes over, and now the FBI believes the following: that Kevin Thacker, 0.2 blood alcohol, instead of going into the alley that he just came in from, finds somehow the stairway that leads to the roof of the building. In total darkness now, Kevin Thacker somehow within a minute or two runs up 3 flights of stairs in total darkness, and you can see from the photograph on the second landing is a tire he wouldn't have seen. Then as he got to the top of the stairway to the door that leads to the roof, there's a tire blocking the door, which was not moved at all in that photograph. That photograph was taken by Templeton that night, after Kevin Thacker supposedly did all these things. So number one is a tire on the second landing in total darkness. There's a tire by the door at the top with no evidence being moved. And by the way, in this 1.5-year investigation by the FBI, they never once called me or asked me any questions about helping out with the case. Although I knew this case better than any human being. I did all the depositions, I did the trial, I did all the exhibits, all the jury instructions, you name it, everything I knew about this case. They could have simply called me and asked me for opinions or advice or to help them with the investigation. Never did that. Yet they called Michael Moon, M-O-O-N, the attorney for Kendall Eldred during the trial, many times to get their cover-up coordinated. I'm not saying Michael Moon was part of the cover-up. He was the lawyer for the guy. I do respect Michael Moon, actually. He was a pretty straight shooter, became a judge eventually. He had a very tough case. He had a very bad-lying client, a bad-lying organization. The jury didn't believe a word they said. So, according to the FBI now, Kevin Thacker was somehow able to get onto the roof. You can see a photograph of the roof. By the way, these photographs are lit up by a camera light. If this were seen in its true state, it would be pitch dark. Kevin would not have seen anything. And therefore, the FBI has him walking over this gravel roof, and he has one of his shoes, which is later that evening seized. There's a thorn sticking in the sole of the shoe. If indeed Kevin Thacker walked on this gravel roof, that thorn would have broken off, would not have been attached to the shoe, which was photographed later that evening. So Kevin is able now, within seconds, on the dark roof, not knowing what he's doing or where he's going, is able to somehow find this beam. And you see a picture of the beam on the roof, and is able to somehow climb on the beam, as drunk as he is, and heel to toe walk to the end of the beam, 6 feet out in total darkness, not tripping over the end of the beam, which has a 6-inch metal lip. So puts his feet together according to master liar Rock Templeton, and was able to do a broad jump now from that position 35 feet above the ground that no stuntman would even try without a net or wires. But according to the FBI, says that Kevin Thacker did all this, as drunk as he was, from that height, and successfully makes the broad jump across the alley, 12 feet. Now, Kevin couldn't even see the other building. You can see the photograph of the lit up beam, but the background is in total darkness. How would Kevin Thacker know how far to jump or even to jump anywhere? But yet the FBI says that's what he did. To cover up the murder of Kevin Thacker by Kendall Eldred, this is what your FBI says. So he successfully flies through the air to the other roof, the Coliseum roof, which is curved, successfully lands on it now, on his knees, his face, his hands, his chest, without injury, according to the FBI. While on the roof now, a cigarette and a lighter, which is in his shirt pocket, somehow dislodges. Only a cigarette, one cigarette and one lighter from the pack of cigarettes. And it's under him, by the way, they say. The FBI says the cigarette lighter is under his body because he falls backwards from the curved roof of the Coliseum down to the alley below, 24 feet, hard surface, asphalt surface, not perpendicular or in any kind of distorted position, but parallel to the roof with his arms and legs spread out, which you can see from the photograph. And supposedly, according to the FBI, your FBI, the cigarette lighter remained intact on the roof, which later on Rock Templeton planted, which is obvious as day that he did, of course. And this is what the FBI believes, that Rock Templeton didn't plant these, that the cigarette lighter was caused by Kevin Thacker's miraculous jump without being injured. And so then Kevin Thacker, according to the FBI, falls backwards to the alley, 24 feet, with no injury. Not a bruise, not a black blue mark, not a broken bone, not a misplaced organ, not a broken neck, not a cracked skull. And the only injury on his body, which is found later on at the hospital and the autopsy, is a hairline fracture to the side of his head, left temporal lobe bone, which extended to the occipital bone. A violent force that cracked his skull, which I said earlier caused the contractile injury, which caused a hemorrhage, which caused his brain to shut down. This is the FBI's version of what happened, completely agreeing with the cops' version, completely contradicting and ignoring the verdict of the jury, the trial judge, and our Supreme Court. Now, there are 7 billion people on Earth. I think if the FBI, if you FBI, corrupt liars as you are, if you polled all 7 billion people and gave them the scenario that the cops gave you, you think one human being on Earth would believe this? That a human body can fly through the air 12 feet, land with that sort of force with no injury, and then fall backwards to the alley with no injury? You can find one medical doctor in the whole world, or a nurse, or any person with common sense to agree to that. But only, and only the FBI agrees with this. Your FBI. So, where we stand now is, I've been trying since 1986 when this phony FBI report came out, clearing the cop of murder. Let me go back for 1 second to further show and demonstrate why I believe the FBI is guilty of being an accessory to murder after the fact. The definition of accessory to murder after the fact is a person who aids, abets, and assists in helping a murderer escape prosecution, arrest, or conviction by planting evidence, by concealing evidence, by helping the murderer after the fact. This is a very common crime with some murderers, especially family members who, out of loyalty, whatever, lie to the police about the whereabouts of a murderer, or actually hide evidence, throw a gun in the river, or do something to avoid prosecution. And this is exactly what your FBI did in this case. They are no doubt in my mind guilty of accessory to murder after the fact, because what they did allowed Kendall Eldred and his co-conspirator cops that night to avoid prosecution. Remember I said before that Rock Templeton said Kevin Thacker did a standing broad jump at the end of the beam. I asked him clearly and specifically in deposition and at trial, did Kevin Thacker do a running jump? He said, no. I saw 2 footprints in dust at the end of the beam. Therefore, his testimony was Kevin Thacker did a broad jump. Now, the FBI, in their phony investigation, the one that never called me about anything, went to the Iowa swim team coach in Iowa City, Iowa, to see how far the swimmers can jump into the water, hoping that somebody could do 12 feet. Well, not one could do past 8 feet. They would all be dead if they did a broad jump off that beam. So the FBI now, with a predetermined covering up of the cops, they had only covering up the cops in their mind. They did not think at all this was a possible homicide, or even reasonable suspicion it was a homicide, or even probable cause it was a homicide. They completely said there was nothing to do with the homicide in this case. So the FBI had to dissociate Kevin Thacker from Eldred in the alley, because if they couldn't lie that Kevin Thacker made these leaps and he didn't make these leaps and therefore was injured in the alley by a human being, that would blow their cover up. They couldn't refuse to prosecute or have a grand jury or some indictment of Kendall Eldred. So the FBI had to somehow put Kevin Thacker on the other roof because the swim team coach and swimmers said that they couldn't do past 8 feet. So now, what does the FBI do? What good accessories to murder after the fact do? They invent evidence to help their person get away with murder. So they created a diagram, the Running Man, which now, without any tests or experiments or any evidence whatsoever, the FBI concocts a diagram, now proving from the diagram that Kevin Thacker was able to do a running jump across the beam, and that without tripping, of course, pushing off at the end of the beam in a parabolic trajectory and landing on the other roof successfully. Without this diagram, without this made-up story, the FBI could not place Kevin Thacker on the other roof. Therefore, Templeton was lying to them, and they'd have to look at this as a murder investigation. So to make sure they didn't have to indict him or arrest him for anything, they invented the running flying through the air man to the other roof. This, again, is inventing evidence that didn't exist for the purpose of avoiding prosecution for a known criminal. So, this is the story. This is a Thacker case. This is your FBI doing nothing about it. I urge you, if you're an FBI agent, to question your supervisor why this fallacy continues to exist. And I also want you to realize you are working for a criminal organization. Until this finding is set aside, it's a fact to you that the human body can do all these things like your FBI colleague said. So you decide, if you have a conscience, if you love the truth, if you're a true American, you wouldn't allow this to happen. So I urge you, if you're a politician, somehow seeing this video, you want to interview me or question me, I'm available. I'm available with the FBI or anyone who wants to get to the truth of this matter and get the case reopened. Thank you very much for listening, and let's hope that this bears fruit. Thank you.